This is Ron Coddington from Military Images. It is Monday night. 2 weeks ago, we had our last episode, and here we go with episode 6 in this third season of Military Images. We're going to make a little time available so everyone can come on and get a chance to say hello. And while we're doing that, I'll give you a couple of updates. First, I'll tell you about our sponsor, which is the Excelsior Brigade. And the Excelsior Brigade are purveyors of fine military images. They specialize in identified images, Union, as far as I can tell, mostly on their sites. And the proprietor is Jim Quinlan, who is the founder and the leader of the Arlington Cemetery Project, which seeks to identify all of the Civil War burials in Arlington National Cemetery, which is a lot harder than it sounds when you think about 440,000 grave sites and 30,000 Union veterans scattered throughout. So folks are coming on. Michael Pissarro is here. Michael, how are you doing? Gilbert Sorrell, Steve Hanley, my new friend from the world of the photo. I can't remember the name at the moment, but I'll pick that up a little bit later. More folks are coming on. So as you guys are coming on, I'll tell you a little bit more about the Excelsior Brigade. They're doing some great work. I urge you to visit their site, excelsiorbrigade.com. Take a look at all the fine images that they have, and you might find something that you like. So I see Andrew Miller is here. How's it going? John Harris is here. How are you doing tonight, sir? Glad all of you could join us. I know this is difficult times for everyone, as throughout most of the country now, there's folks who are sheltered in place and dealing with the coronavirus, with the pandemic. And as I said last week, we certainly are going to get through this all together, and we will make it through this. And to help you do that, we are going to continue with Military Images Live, and we're going to tell you, thank you, Andrew. I'm doing fine, and so was my family. A little interruption there. Jeff Jambrone. Hey, Jeff, how are you? We're trying to keep everybody going with some good programming, including Military Images Live. Of course, you have Military Images Magazine. That issue is coming out soon. And I'm hoping that some of you have had an opportunity to see Caretakers. I'm seeing a bunch of emojis going up, so I'm taking that as a very, very positive sign. We've had a great response to that so far. A big shout out to Doug York of Civil War Faces for all that he's doing to help get everyone ready to participate, to identify collectors. We started with Kevin's program. Kevin is up here on top of this poster. He was our first participant in Caretakers, and Kevin talked about his collection. And then below him is Austin Sundstrom. Austin talked about the 55th Illinois Infantry, which is a passion of his, and talked about his photo collecting and how it continues to inspire him today. Vicki Stevens is here. Vicki, thank you. Michelle Wise. Hey, Dennis, glad you're here tonight. Bill Schultz is here. Oh, we're getting a packed house, and I'm really glad that all of you showed up tonight, and super excited about that. And thank you again for visiting, Dennis. I appreciate that. Susie Rainsford is here from Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you so much. I appreciate the emojis. And while more folks are coming on, let me tell you, although we're all sheltered in place for a good bit of time, Faces of Freedom, which is the exhibit that we're gearing up for, that's going to be held at the Goodrich House in York, Pennsylvania, is we're still operating as if that's going to happen on July 11th of this year. So fingers crossed, but if we need to change, we're going to change, because your health and safety comes first. But this exhibit will happen. If it's not on July 11th, it will be sometime afterwards. So why I want to mention this tonight, for that reason, and also another reason. The deadline for entries is April 1st. Now, let me check my calendar. You've got about 48 hours if you want to submit an entry. And here's how it works. You don't need to send in a high resolution scan. All we need to see, we can see a phone pic at this point, whatever is convenient for you. So you can PM it to me. You can email it to militaryimages@gmail.com. And we're going to collect all those images. And I believe that we have over 60 of them right now. In fact, I'm going to show you one of the ones that came in today. Wow. A young soldier with corporal stripes and his drum. It does not get much better than that. This one is from the Greg French collection. And we're going to take Greg's images, other submissions, and we're going to judge them, and we're going to select a group of that number. We can't put them all in the show, but we're going to select a group. And then once we have made our selections, we're not going to put the original images in the show because of insurance reasons and all of that, but we are going to get high resolution images from you, and then we're going to make museum quality printouts, and we're going to put those into the exhibit. So April 1st, 48 hours away. If you've got an original image, excuse me, from the Civil War period, it does not have to be a soldier, but it does have to be an African-American related image. If you have one, please let me know. So let's go on. I've been thinking a lot about the coronavirus. I've been thinking a lot about all of the nurses and the doctors and other emergency folks and other first responders who have been on the scene. And I can't help but think about the nurses that I've recently researched. In fact, a book that I wrote about Civil War nurses that's supposed to come out next week, excuse me, has been postponed until October, until all this passes by. So a lot of those nurses have been front of mind over the past weeks. I've been thinking about their experiences and relating it to those on the front lines today. And I want to tell you about one of them. And if you go to the US American Military Heritage Education website in Carlisle Barracks, but you can go to their website right now. If you dig around long enough, you'll find this photo that's in there. And her name is Rose. Her name is Rose Billings, in fact. And something drew me to her photograph is the fact that she's wearing glasses. She has light-colored eyes. She was described as a somewhat frail individual. I'm not sure if that was a reference to her wearing glasses or just her general health. But she was described as frail. And she's also sort of a military brat. She lived in Washington, D.C. Her father was a colonel in the D.C. militia. And he also worked in the War Department. So there was definitely a military connection there. So when the Civil War started, of course, Rose wanted to get involved, and she went and found Dorothea Dix, who many of you know was named as the head of nurses for the Union Army with headquarters in Washington. And she filed an application to become a nurse, and Dorothea Dix approved her. And so thus began a journey that pretty much kept her in the metropolitan DC area, although she did go out as far as Fredericksburg. So she was in Falls Church, she was in Washington, she went down to Fredericksburg. She was the kind of person who, she's a quiet worker, a Christian, a very strong Christian, a quiet worker who somehow had a bit of magic. She knew really how to take care of people. She made them feel important, whether they were wounded in battle or sick. This is what she did. In fact, one of her fellow nurses described her as a young lady of most winning manners. And she went on to say, um, she was a devoted and conscientious worker, one of the most devoted and conscientious she'd ever known, an earnest Christian, caring always for the spiritual as well as the physical wants of the men. So this is Rose Billings, who starts as a nurse in 1861, and being in Washington and in Northern Virginia, down in Fredericksburg, she's seeing her fair share of cases of the wounded from the Virginia battlefields and from the sick, diseased folks who were there. In 1864, she had a bit of a change, actually, when she moved out to Annapolis, which was the naval school, which had been moved up to New England for the duration of the war, because there was concerns that the Confederates would capture Annapolis and with it take the school and the students in there, the cadets. So instead, they turned Annapolis and the campus into a sprawling military hospital. They, of course, were in need of nurses, especially with the influx of returned prisoners of war that were coming in. And so Rose is sent on duty to handle all of that. And on New Year's Day of 1865, she falls ill. And as far as I could tell, it's the first time that she's fallen sick in almost 4 years of service. And she falls sick with typhus actually, and she's bedridden, she's feverish, she's not well, and she soon sinks, and she doesn't make it. She doesn't make it. On January 14th, exactly 2 weeks after she falls ill, Rose dies of disease. Same disease that was killing many of the men that she was taking care of. She had a last wish. She also had a bit of a reputation, as I mentioned earlier. There's a fellow nurse who heard her story and wrote about it. You're going to know the name of the nurse that told Rose the story. His name is Walt Whitman. Here's what Walt Whitman had to say. Here's his quote. He didn't know Rose personally. He knew of her. And to me, that alone speaks of Rose Billings' power. Here's what the poet Walt Whitman had to say. A lady named Miss or Mrs. Billings, who has long been a practical friend of soldiers and a nurse in the Army, and had become attached to it in a way that no one can realize but him or her who has had experience, who was taken sick early this winter, lingered for some time, and finally died in the hospital. Whitman added a note. It was her request. This is an important request. It was her request that she should be buried among the soldiers and after the military method. Her coffin was carried to the grave by soldiers with the usual escort, buried, and a salute fired over her grave. This was in Annapolis a few days since. So, on a cold January day in 1865, Rose was buried in Annapolis in Soldiers' Cemetery there, alongside the men that she cared for. Her body was removed later on, didn't remain there. She was later moved to Washington, D.C., to Congressional Cemetery, where she's buried with her family. So when all of this blows over, when the coronavirus blows over, if you're in Washington, next time you're in Washington, make your way to Congressional Cemetery and pay your respects to Rose. So, going down my list of items, I still have a couple of images left over from the Dalton show that I wanted to get to, partly because I promised folks that I was going to put some of these images on Military Images Live. And for whatever reason, mostly not out of a desire not to do it, but just a lot of other things to get on the show, I haven't gotten around to it. So one image here is from Bobby McCoy's collection. And this is a CDV of Captain Edward Butler Greene. And he was captured, I should say, first of all, he was in the 21st South Carolina Infantry and had joined the regiment in early 1862, fought through numerous battles in Virginia and in the South, wounded June 19th of 1864, made it through the first 2 years of the war, wounded on June 19th at Petersburg, the Battle for Petersburg. He helps do his part to slow down the Union advance and remains there until January of 1865. So January 15th, 1865, a day after Rose Billings dies in Annapolis, Edward Butler Greene is at Fort Fisher in Wilmington, and he's captured. And he eventually gains his release and poses for this photograph, which by all, at an easy glance, it looks like he's a fairly well-kept man wearing a officer's frock and a belt and boots, nice shiny leather boots. And doing a little bit of research on Captain Greene, I discovered this posting by Brian White, who mentions that this particular photographer, the man who took this image, Charles Bill of New York City. There's actually a few other Confederate images taken by Charles Bill about the same time, at least two other ones that are known. And in both of those images, the Confederate officers are wearing what appears to be the same belt and the same boots. So I've heard a lot of stories about props. You have heard them too, about prop weapons, prop swords, prop guns, prop revolvers. And this is maybe the first case that I'm familiar with of prop boots and a prop belt. So good news here. I'm not sure if he was the first, second, or third Confederate to wear them, but maybe more wore them in a visit to Charles Bill's gallery. Anyway, Greene survived his imprisonment and lived until 1899, dying at age 67. So if you're interested in props, there's one for you. Also want to put this one. This is the last of the Dalton images. And this one is from Brad Birch's collection. And the moment I saw it, I thought, wow, can't get much better than this. It's there's nothing about this man that suggests he's in any kind of a uniform. He's wearing an undershirt, his suspenders are visible, he's got a decent shaped hat, some baggy pants on, some worn boots. You can see his muddy boots. He certainly wasn't up around Charles Bill's gallery. In fact, he was in Corinth, Mississippi. And we know that because of a very nice period engraving that's scratched into the emulsion here. And there's a date on it, July 23rd, 1862. And gosh, should I even mention the lead? I buried the lead. He's carrying this very impressive whip in his hand, which creates a rather lovely artistic impression, the way it's curved around here. So July 23rd, 1862 is an important date in a way. At least it establishes probably who this guy was, considering the way he's dressed, the whip that he's holding, and the date and the location. Fairly safe to say that there's a really good chance that this man is a Union teamster. Because on July 23rd, 1862, Corinth had been in Union hands for the better part of 6 weeks and fallen in early May. So here we have this man, a teamster, and he's posing quite nicely. So just wanted to pass that Brad Birch image along. You'll probably see that again in a certain magazine that I know about in a future issue, so you can appreciate the wonderful detail in depth. So there's that. I've got, I want to bring attention here to a story quick story. This appeared in Civil War History magazine, the current issue. And this article was brought to my attention by Kurt Luther. And Kurt pointed out, oh, by the way, it's called The Last and Most Precious Memento, Photographic Portraiture in the Union Citizen Soldier by James Brooks. It's a great article. Details all kinds of references to photography. The personal soldier indicates its importance. I really would recommend, if you can find a copy of this, The Last and Most Precious Memento, Photographic Portraiture in the Civil War by James Brooks. Pick it up. Quite worth a read. One of the quotes caught my attention. Here it is. Here we go. The federal, it's a little long, but it's worth it. The federal interment report for the Gettysburg National Cemetery notes that of the 20 deceased soldiers found with photographs on their immediate person, 18 are carrying only one. Well, how does Mr. Brooks know this? Well, it's a great resource and a little known book. Well, I should say, maybe not little known. If you're a student of Gettysburg and the aftermath and the dedication ceremony in November of 1863, attended by Lincoln, you probably know the book. It's the revised report made to the legislature of Pennsylvania relative to the Soldiers National Cemetery at Gettysburg. You know, it's a mouthful of a book, but here it is. Here's the title page for that book. I highly recommend you look it up. In fact, I'll post it here on the comments. It's a Google book, or I think it's archive.org, and you can skim through it for free. Anyway, the book is great. Thank you. Interment, yes. You'll forgive my trying to get through that long title. So Dan Weinstock, you got me. So it is Interment. In particular, and getting to James Brooks's comment, you've got this list of articles, and this is page 144. It says, list of articles taken from the bodies of the soldiers removed by the Soldiers National Cemetery, by which many unknown were recognized and which are in full possession of the cemetery associations at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So what follows that is a number of pages that inventory the contents of the pockets and haversacks of all these Union soldiers. And it is about as poignant as you could possibly imagine. And I shouldn't say Union, it's unknown. So it could be Union and Confederate. And so there's a couple instances here that I suspect you're not going to be able to see, but here they are. Unknown, 2 combs and an ambrotype. Unknown, ambrotype of a woman. Unknown, ambrotype, knife, 2 pipes, keys, inkstand, and etc. So you've got this documentation of what was actually found on the bodies of these men. Interestingly, of all the references, the 18-20 references that are in the book, all of them, except for one, say ambrotype. One of them says photograph. So I'm not quite sure if they're all actually carrying ambrotypes. We've seen evidence of tintypes and cartes de visite also being carried into battle. So could it be that they just happen to have all ambrotypes? Did they apply the term ambrotype to describe all formats of photography? Don't know, but certainly worthy of your attention. Wanted to point it out to you. If you're not familiar with this book, give it a look. It's a combination of poignant bits of material culture like we have here, and then there's very nuts and bolts bits of information about costs and burial and all that sorts of thing, how much it costs for each body to be moved, those sorts of details. So give it a look if you're interested to get a bit of a picture of how the cemetery at Gettysburg actually came together. Now, I've got about 5 minutes left, and I take a little trip down the research rabbit hole. And this one started as I was scrolling through the computer. I was looking at a lot of news and information about coronavirus specific to Virginia, where I live, and other parts of the region. And I saw this screen capture, which is it's a press conference that was given by the governor of New York. And this bit of it just sort of caught my attention in the way that it would only capture the attention of someone who was interested in the Civil War. This is the actual screen from the video, and it says Excelsior, and it says E pluribus unum. So, of course, those of you who know New York know that that's the state motto, and it's on their flag, the word Excelsior. And the point that the governor was making is that the term Excelsior means ever upward, which he was using to characterize the spirit of the state. And then he was also using our country's motto, E pluribus unum, out of many one, and putting those together to make this grand, emotional, dramatic statement about New York, ever upward, out of many one. But really, it pertains to the whole country. We're always looking upward, no matter what state you live in. So New York certainly has Excelsior as their label. So, of course, being the Civil War students, I immediately think of the Excelsior Brigade. I also thought of Jim Quinlan and the Excelsior Brigade, but I thought about the Excelsior Brigade and, of course, all these wonderful, wonderful posters. You've got this one, Jack Tars, ahoy, wanted immediately for Company I, 5th Regiment Excelsior Brigade, 50 able-bodied seamen. Of course, you've got this poster here, Sickles Excelsior Brigade, headquarters in City Hall Park. If you read on down here, you'll find out that there's something like a $132 bounty, which, if you're a private soldier, that's about 10 months, almost a year of your salary. And of course, who's the man behind this fancy broadside? You know him. It's Daniel Sickles, who, speaking of Gettysburg, of course, has a unique connection. These are just a few of the many, many images of Dan Sickles that go to the wartime. Of course, one of my favorites is after the war. Here he is with his pince-nez and his mustache. He's now balding. Older man, I believe the longest living Civil War general, at least on the Union side, 1914 or something like that. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, you've got Dan Sickles. And in addition to all those broadsides, you see Excelsior Brigade plastered over everything. Here's the 1st Regiment Excelsior Brigade official letterhead defending the motto of New York, the camps and campaign in the background. You've got this hand-carved ivory corps badge, 5th Brigade Excelsior, with the soldier's name on top. You know, last show, I did all the campaign flags. Well, here's another flag that sort of has that same writing all over it, the writing that later disappears after 1912. This is the 71st New York Volunteer Infantry, Bull Run, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg. And then you've got this pristine headquarters flag, square-shaped, the canton turned what seems to be a vertical, the stars in an oval instead of a circle. Here, of course, a classic shako with EB, Excelsior Brigade. You've got a drum that has Excelsior Brigade prominently on top of it. Go back to Daniel Sickles' Gettysburg, and you'll see the whole monument with the Excelsior Brigade wrapped around the top. And of course, a number of photo studios across the country that are called the Excelsior Gallery. This one happens to be in New York State. So Excelsior, a big, big name, of course, to all of us who know about the Civil War. Doesn't matter what side you're interested in, Excelsior Brigade has got to be up there as one of the more recognizable names of the Civil War period. So if you keep going on, you start to realize, or the question comes to your mind, well, Excelsior, that word isn't owned by New York. Who else has it? So this is when the rabbit hole starts going down a little bit more. Here you go. Excelsior Pottery from Parkersburg, West Virginia. The Excelsior Stove Manufacturing Company, I believe they are in Illinois, in Quincy, Illinois. You've got the Excelsior Stove Manufacturer. And then the name Excelsior, it actually does not disappear. The name seems to gain some traction as the years go by, as the decades pass. You have Excelsior Coffee. You have Excelsior Spices. You have Excelsior Carbonate of Ammonia, which I'm not sure what that's used for, but I'd be careful. You have a problem with your Victrola. Maybe one of your needles need to be replaced. Well, you want a pack of Excelsior needles for your Victrola. Is your car having some issues, or maybe your chainsaw? Well, get yourself some Excelsior motor oil. How about your bird? Some Excelsior bird food keeps your birds happy. There's more. Excelsior Burgle and Biscuit Butter Spread. I'm not so sure about butter spread in a tin, but yeah, I might give it a try. Even today, Excelsior Brigade Excelsior is a big deal. You can go to Excelsior Brewing Company and get yourself something to replenish your thirst. And then, of course, there's canned Excelsior mackerel. And if you don't like mackerel, well, you can enjoy a nice tin of Excelsior corned beef. Now, if you are involved in weightlifting and you want to power up a little bit and want to supplement, try Excelsior powder. That might do it for you. Anyway, that's what we got for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a great collector and a great part of the photo collecting community. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks with a new program. Remember, this Saturday is the next installment of Caretakers. We're going to have Chuck Joyce, who specializes, his collector's focus is Gettysburg. So I'm going to take a guess at what he'll be talking about. You'll want to tune in. That's going to be on Civil War Faces Facebook page, 6:30 is the start time on Saturday night. So get yourself some Excelsior mackerel, or maybe the corned beef. Have an Excelsior beer with that, and sit down and enjoy the show. So take care, happy hunting, and we'll see you the next time on Military Images Live. Have a great night.